It's my pleasure to open this third meeting of philosophers and social theorists from the Complutense Research Group, GINEDIS, and the Critic Lab of the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory of the University of Belgrade. I would like to recall that we put together some of the presentations discussed in past meetings, the meetings we held in 2017 and 2019 in the Palgrave book, Rethinking Vulnerability and Exclusion. Our discussions there and this publication confirm our shared standpoints as we address in these meetings and also in the book the sources of social suffering and democratic disrepair, especially focusing in the South European context. This time, the papers to be discussed will focus on the impact that the dynamics of recognition and epistemic cooperation shows on the claims we raise towards contemporary democratic institutions. We will engage in a hopefully lively discussion about how institutions work or should work nowadays as agents of social change and political progress. Thank you very much for making it happen to Marian and Adriana. And please, Adriana, if you want to go ahead with your opening words before we start.
Thank you, Nuria, and not just for this introduction, but also for the fact that we are doing this together, and we're doing this together for the third time. And this is exactly what I would like us to mention at the moment, this little trajectory that we have behind us. I will necessarily repeat something of what you already said, but I would like us to somehow revisit the titles also of the previous workshops, and to see, I mean, how big issues we have been already thinking together as philosophers and social theorists coming from Madrid and Belgrade, although we constantly call that Serbia and Spain. And to then also say a few words about what we are going to talk about today and tomorrow. So in November 2017, we met in Madrid, organized by Complutense University, at the workshop whose name was Engaging Vulnerability and Exclusion, Rethinking the Subject in the 21st Century. And out of that meeting came out the publication that Nuria also mentioned, in 2020, issued by Palgrave, Rethinking Vulnerability and Exclusion, Historical and Critical Essays, edited by Nuria and me and Blanca Rodriguez Lopez. Then in September 2019, we met again with the topic, which was, I think, even bigger and grander in scope, the return of violence, contemporary anxieties of the communities. We met then in Belgrade at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory. And the beginning of this third workshop, which, as you can see, we meet every 2 years now, and I hope that in 2023, we're going to have the fourth meeting in the same line. We had one joint lecture, Precarity Lab of Complutense organized a lecture that I gave on precarity's double bind, the notion of the precarious in Judith Butler. And then later on, after that lecture, Clara Navarro wrote an email which sparked the discussion about Butler's understanding of institutions, which then led us to think together further on this topic. And Nuria's agility and her always practical mind led us to immediately set up the third Spanish-Serbian workshop, which bears the title now, The Cultural Politics of Trust, Recognition, Institutions, Democracy, as we wanted to link what GINEDIS does in Madrid with what the Critique Lab, our newly founded laboratory at the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory, does in Belgrade. And to end this short introduction, I was thinking, I went back to what we were writing, the three of us, Nuria, Marian, and me, when we were considering how to pack this very large topic, which has quite some keywords in its title. And I was thinking, what is precisely the most important question also with regards to the abstracts that we have? And I would dare to say that that question is, how do we trust and why, and how institutions help us to trust? And I think that this question, as we just mentioned 5 minutes ago, has a great resound at the moment, everywhere in the world, because we are now entering the second year of pandemic, and in fact, the third year of pandemic is very soon there. And I think that the question of trust in institutions is really big. So I think that we will here employ different approaches to come to an answer or various answers to this question. And we are already accustomed to great exchanges, so I believe that this one will be no exception. And finally, I want to give one service info, and that is that the workshop today and tomorrow are going to be recorded at the moment and will be available online on our Institute's YouTube channel, Engage Thought. So, Marian, I hope you can continue. Thank you.
You've already said all the important things, but let me just add a few words about our laboratory, which is co-organizing this great event together with GINEDIS. Critique Lab, as Adriana mentioned, is a recently founded small research unit within the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, and is devoted, as its name says, to the analysis of social critique, which is one very broad and contested phenomenon and concept. So we are trying to map out certain competing approaches to social critique, certain competing conceptualizations to try to understand what are the basic preconditions of social critique, what are the basic modalities in which social critique is practiced, and what kind of theoretical conceptualizations allow us to link social critique to other key concepts that we are dealing with within the Institute, such as engagement, such as democracy, such as theory of institutions, of course. And this is, as Adriana mentioned, the first big international event of the laboratory. We had certain exchanges with very productive exchanges with sociologists and from Poland, for example. But this mini conference, which it actually is very stimulating for the laboratory, because it is devoted to the phenomenon of trust, which is indeed at the very heart of both critique and engagement, in my opinion. And some of those questions that are listed in the description are indeed, I would say, very fundamental for understanding exactly how critique and engagement function. Namely, without trust, there is no intersubjectivity, and without intersubjectivity, there is no social critique in the real sense of the word, I would say, because social critique, in order to have any effectivity, needs to be collective, needs to be intersubjectively intelligible, and therefore it needs to rest on certain relations of intersubjective trust. And the same goes for social engagement. So the real question is the question of causality, and this is at the core of our event, I think. Is trust some kind of pre-social foundation of critique and engagement, or is it, on the other hand, the case that social engagement and critique are prerequisites of trust, in the sense that they need to be built into the institutional system which is conducive to trust? So what kind of institutions, as Adriana already said, do we need in order to trust each other? And I think that in the next 2 days we will consider these issues at some detail. So I wouldn't want to take up any more time, and I would like to welcome our guests from Madrid and our audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, so much. I'm now appearing here in the form of the chair of the first panel. And I would like to mention that the chair of the second panel is going to be our Igor Cvej. And I would also like to mention that unfortunately Mark Loshant, who was supposed to be the third speaker on the first panel, due to some private matters, will not be with us today. So as we are ahead of time, and as we are going to have more time than we actually planned to have, I suggest we start and then we simply give ourselves time. So I would even say that if our speakers, that means Clara, Navarro, and Srdjan, Prodanovic, if they have 5 minutes more, they can add to their presentations. So let me just introduce the speakers and what they're going to talk about today. Clara Navarro, who comes from Madrid, from Complutense University, will have the presentation entitled "Could Insurgent Universality be Institutionalized? Alternative Pathways of Modernity?" where she will tell us something about the fact that the modern state, as it's very often claimed, especially by Judith Butler, perpetuates a certain process of subjectivation that is unable to grasp the inherent plurality of what is. And with this background in mind, Navarro will analyze the concept of insurgent universality developed by Massimiliano Tomba in his 2019 book, Insurgent Universality and Alternative Legacy of Modernity, with the aim to find out if this concept can be fruitfully used to establish alternative fundaments to our institutions. Whereas Srdjan Prodanovic of our Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory will have the presentation entitled Normative Intuitions, Trust and Social Change. And he will try to examine trust as a form of agency. The main line of the argument that Srdjan Prodanovic argues for will be that in situations that are relatively free of contingency, trust reduces complexities of social interaction and can therefore be seen as a social function which enables relatively seamless reproduction of given social system. But in cases where contingency generates a rupture in everyday knowledge, trusting someone or trusting some source of information can actually be taken as a constituent part of human agency. It comes as no surprise that Prodanovic then wants to see the implication of this understanding of trust on current theoretical understandings of social change. So I will first give floor to Clara, and then after Clara, Srdjan, and then we will have a discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much to Adriana for her presentation. And first of all, I would like to say that I'm really glad. Can you hear me clearly? Because I'm okay. That I'm really glad to be here for the third time. Our past gatherings have been always very insightful, and I have no doubt that this will be as insightful as the last ones. Okay, so I'm going to share the paper I'm going to read so everyone can follow it, because I was planning to display it here, but I have it in paper, so I prefer to read it on the paper so you can have it here. And okay. And well, I have changed my paper from what I sent at the first time, and I'm really sorry about that, because I'm not going to talk about Butler or Tomba. I'm going to talk about two phenomena that we should take into account when we're talking about the nation states which are the notion of the transnational sovereign and the notion of governance. It is my bad that I didn't maybe say it clearly, but don't worry, because Tomba is not so, it's not so interesting, so it's not a problem. It's okay, but it's not so interesting. I just hope it is not a problem that I changed my presentation. Well, I don't know if you have already the paper on your display. You can say yes. Nuria said yes, because I have it here, so I can start. Please take into account that it's not, the paper is not proofread. So if there's any mistake in English, please excuse my errors, and also take into account that this is a shortened version of what I plan to have later. So I hope it's understandable. I think it is, but maybe it's a little bit too compressed, but we will see. And in any case, we will have time to discuss it. So I'm glad about that. So if you already have the paper on your display, I'm going to read the paper. Okay. So it has become a commonplace of social theory to remark the deep changes developed by the 2007 and 8 financial crash. By the pertinent comment, it is also true that we have not since recovered, and as a society, we still tend to hope that more prosperous times are yet to come. One of the elements which helped us to overcome difficulties successfully in the past is the all-nation state, which nowadays presents a completely different setting compared to olden days. In Europe, this structure is conformed by the rules of the European Union, and every other non-European self-respected state feels subjected to the norms, treaties, and rules of different international organisms that limit and shape its margin of action. Not surprisingly, this context has favored the rise of populisms of diverse kind, as well as political parties which promise simple solutions to an increasingly complex political situation. In the next minutes, we will tackle some of the changes that have led to the profound changes of the state. As we will see, the feeling of national disempowerment expressed by many is constituted, among other factors, by the changes induced by the development of a globalized economy. Despite the fact that in the global pandemic of the COVID-19, some might have felt tempted to close frontiers as the sped strategy to protect themselves, this has finally been proved useless. In a globalized economy, as I said, commodities, viruses, and people move around the world, making more and more difficult to say who does one come from or where something was made. The state, however, still holding important parts of power, has gone through a process of powerlessness directly aligned to the rise of economy that constitutes its production and distribution internationally. We will see how that happened in the next minutes. Okay, so the globalization of production has been the most striking transformation of the economy in the past and present century. Its development is correlated to the introduction of the information and communication technologies, which have significantly reduced the costs of production and distribution. These new communications have fragmented the fabrication process and located it around the globe, constituting thus what we call global value chains, which can be defined as those bounds of diverse economic actors that constitute a process of production where the different stages of the production process are located across different countries. The consequences of this new organization of the economy has affected globally both work and territory. Today, we can speak of a global workforce that competes internationally in all sectors. It has also affected the old stability of the Fordist paradigm, which anchored labor to a territory and made thus the nation state the main scene of the economy. Here is where the notions of transnational sovereign and diffuse regime of power start to be relevant. The notion of transnational sovereign and the diffuse regime of power were developed by Juan Ramón Capella in a book called Fruta Prohibida. They express the shift of power caused as a consequence of the new frame of production, as well as the set of policies which are considered standard for its correct functioning. In a world where the production takes place in several countries, there is little space for national restrictions such as custom duties or monopolies over certain products. The interests of the transnational companies begin so to be defended by public and private actors, producing some regulations and norms that should be actually the results of the deliberation of national parliaments, and so by the people represented by those parliaments. The main objective is to set the logistical and regulatory frame which is necessary for the correct functioning of those transnational companies. This objective, this correct functioning, implies fostering a smooth movement of commodities and capitals between countries, as well as the harmonization of labor, environmental, and sanitary regulations, which are more and more subjected to bilateral economical partnerships through what we call free trade agreements. The alliance more concretely takes place between the following actors: the transnational corporations and financial conglomerates, the international multilateral organisms founded after the Second World War, interstate organisms such as the G7, the G20, and in the fourth place, the military power of the USA, who still retains a great influence through NATO. The international character of the partnership constitutes thus a transnational sovereign that is able to influence the policies of the nation states in fiscal, economical, and ecological matters. The consequences of this new regulation, of this new configuration, are especially important in the legal sector, where the regulation and the propagation of a lex mercatoria constitute the two most dominant features of the contemporary affairs in economical international justice. We'll see this in more depth. The jurisdictional frame of the 19th and 20th century was based in the nation state. The system of sources of law, as well as the judges and their competences, were determined by their own state. That changes, though, with the transformation of the economy we have been explaining. In the globalized economy, the real system of sources of law and jurisdiction divides itself in the plurality of actors of the transnational sovereign. Nation states have transferred legislative, executive, and judicial power to transnational organisms, something that signals an important symbolic transformation in their sovereignty, as they no longer have the last word about certain matters. Thus, even though the nation states still hold some of their coercive capacity, they have to share it with international organisms such as the European Union, those multilateral institutions like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, or the which is particularly important for this discussion, the transnational companies whose interests are reflected in the conventional law of the lex mercatoria. What is this lex mercatoria? We can simply define it, this lex mercatoria, as a form of transnational commercial law. This form of law, traditionally more pervious than other to different influences, tends to use the instruments of harmonization and convention to solve its conflicts, their conflicts. Its expansion and present configuration has to do with the rise of power of transnational concerns, the corporations who bend regulations to their own interest and conform the system of courts of arbitration. The historical context of its emergence was especially propitious to that end. Detzalay and Garth have shown that the rise of the lex mercatoria as a functional parallel system of justice has much to do with the conflicts emerged during the 70s in the oil producer countries of the Middle East. The political systems of those countries were either still subjected to the problems of being an ex-colony, or they're far from being a full democracy. In those circumstances, foreign investments sought to warranty their expenditures, appealing to courts they could trust in us enough to take the risk. The need to arbitrate solutions between companies and states constituted gradually a parallel system of justice which, with increasing power of the corporations, finally leaned the whole system of justice to the favor of those transnational corporations. Today, we can say that this new lex mercatoria formalizes the power of transnational corporations availing themselves of the international uses and customs, of the norms of the nation state at the complex of trade contracts, of multilateral, regional, and bilateral trade agreements, treaties, and rules, of the decisions of courts of arbitration, and of the dispute settlement system of the World Trade Organization. The deep interrelation of the nation state with the transnational sovereign has turned the former, the nation state, into a globalizer agent, which has to contribute to the constitution of the global market. The consequence has been a factual privatization of the international commerce law. This reflects itself in the free determination of the law applicable to each contract. That means, aside from any national regulation, which is quite surprising, or the extremely broad understanding of the notion of expropriation, which leads to the fact that any measure implemented by a nation state that can be harmful to the interest of a transnational company, of a transnational corporation, can be denounced by this corporation to the court of arbitration as a form of expropriation. On the other hand, we have also the phenomenon of deregulation, which more broadly names that general process of privatization of the system of justice. The last decades of the past century have been witness of a remarkable proliferation of different instruments of soft law to regulate diverse sectors. In contraposition to the national mechanisms of hard law, the notion of soft law refers to all those guidelines, political declaratives, or codes of conduct that, even if they set a particular standard of behavior in one sector, they are not legally binding. A prominent example of soft law is the discourse of the corporate social responsibility, which has sparked increasing interest in the last decades. This is generally understood as being the way through which a company achieves a balance of economic, environmental, and social imperatives is nothing but a management concept. More specifically, the corporate social responsibility was born in the 19th as an answer to the growing criticism that transnational corporations were receiving because of their harmful practices in relation with human rights. Thanks to the corporate social responsibility, the companies can establish a non-exigible, a voluntary, a self-regulated relationship with the society. If we stop for a moment to reflect about the nature of such a relationship, we can easily conclude that self-regulation, that non-exigibility, are characteristics that can be acceptable if we are speaking of a friendship, yet become more questionable when we are speaking of a company-society relationship. Hence, the expansion of this new universe of concepts is dangerous not only because the suspicious leaning they possess that always favors the interest of companies. In fact, the diversification and multiplicity of regulations considered by its own is per se something worrying. A more fragmented system of justice makes more difficult to notice the diverse interrelations that exist between different sectors. For example, the environmental sector and the social law, thus depriving the different actors implied in the regulation from other perspectives that could be useful and beneficial. Precisely as an answer to the intricacy of the different regulations and more in general to the higher complexity of society, in the last years we have witnessed the introduction of mechanisms of governance. This governance is an elusive notion that is more and more present in the field of economics, of politics and economics, and it's crucial to understand the actual mechanisms of government and policy. If we understand governance as an alternative to the concept of government, we have to understand this governance as a form of rule which includes actors of different natures, such as economic actors, private actors, and the third sectors. Actors who have a legitimate interest in the object of regulation of public policies, the so-called stakeholders. Its origins, the origins of governance, can be traced back to the mechanisms of soft law we mentioned earlier. In this manner, governance is a hybrid, multi-jurisdictional, multi-level, pluricentric, often transnational form of rule in which networks are central, in detriment of hierarchy or exclusive leaderships. Combining features from the market and the well-established administrative instruments, this form of rule stresses processes and functions more than structures. The development of this new regime must be understood in the frame of a world where individuals and groups outside the government and its administrations are becoming more active in the process of shaping our society. This is related to the expansion of actors in the third sector, but also to the rise of the economical power of transnationals we mentioned earlier, and the explosion of advocacy groups that accompanied the whole process. The locus of negotiations of public policies shifts thus from parliaments to state agencies, preferring instruments such as contracts and covenants before any public law. To a certain extent, we can qualify the emergence of governance as a consequence of a world where the state has lost its prominent role, both inside and outside of its territories. Under this state of affairs, the state leads, coordinating diverse actors more than directing operation by its own. Another important notion developed in this field is the concept of meta-governance, which draws attention to the many different ways in which government agencies seek to influence interactive governance processes without reverting too much to classical forms of hierarchical command and control. This way of governing, with roots in the new institutionalization of the 80s, claims to make public policy making more effective and more democratic. It confirms itself around the idea of influencing and coordinating the actions of different self-governing actors instead of controlling directly through a top-down hierarchy. According to Renate Mainz, to implement this tool successfully, all actors, public and private, have to retain a certain amount of power. Also, the problem at stake must be of such nature that neither public nor private actors can solve it on their own, thus having to find a collective solution. Okay, so until here we have stated the concrete features of this new form of governance in a mere descriptive way, without stating whether the mechanisms of governance are more or less legitimate. However, as it can be easily imagined, there have been voices which have raised their doubts on this new form of government. Structurally speaking, the diversification and fragmentation of regulatory regimes and the new forms of cooperation are highly likely to tend to favor to decisions which might be not as democratic as it would be necessary. The growth of experts as neutral or apolitical policymakers is another signal of this situation, which also leads to the more fundamental questions such as who can be considered as an expert and who decides what is political neutral and what not. In this frame, governance claims to find its legitimacy in the participation of stakeholders in the process, as well as in the own rationality of the discussion. Nevertheless, there are some problems which demand the intervention of an external power. One of them is the power imbalance of the actors at the stake, which might cause that those participants with less resources are left unheard. Another important drawback lays on the predisposition of the participants. Social sciences have the fact to assume that in absence of institutions and or regulations, actors tend to act by the rules of rational choice, a dynamic materialized in the figure of the Homo economicus. This model, as is widely known, presents humans as seekers of their own benefit at all costs, something that makes altruist problem solving a remote possibility. In this situation, some authors have spoken of antagonistic cooperation to define those negotiations as possess colliding interests. They stress that these are more likely to end up obstructured and to produce less ambitious, weak solutions, which in the end do not solve the problems to be mended. Both outcomes are challenges to modern governance to which have been already posed some solutions as the establishment of a priori conditions to allow the implementation of governance processes to a given problem. As we have briefly examined, the notion of governance offers a new perspective for social sciences that could foster more participative and horizontal modes of governing societies. However, in absence of a critical reflection, both the horizontality and participation that so promising seem on the paper might end up working for the benefit of the powerful. This would factually legitimate the imposition of a renewed form of ius naturalism where the law of the strongest is the king. In this sense, the contribution of social philosophy is crucial to unfold the ethical and political implications of this approach. Okay, so we have briefly analyzed some of the theories, some of the notions, some of the approaches that are related to the emergence of a globalized economy and seen how that has consequences for the nation state. We have focused thus on the increasing loss of power of the old nation state, which is reflected in its strong vertebration with the diffuse sovereign, the lex mercatoria, and the new process of governance. We have seen in the first place that every approach to the political constitution and the possibility of its transformation must take into account transnational relations and those modes of governing that connect all countries. After that, we have seen that critical reflection on these matters is essential to highlight its possible democratic deficiencies. This is a task that makes the interdisciplinary thinking of social philosophy essential to any analysis of the present, something that makes gatherings such as the one we are having today highly important. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Clara. I suggest we continue with Srdjan now and then have a discussion later on. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Adriana. I will just share the screen now. I have a small presentation here. Okay. Do you see it all? Okay. Not spot. Okay. So first of all, I'm really pleased to be here with you all today. I hope that that we will meet again in some normal circumstances next year. As Adriana already said, my talk will be dedicated towards reflecting upon normative intuitions, its relations with trust and social change. And right off the bat, I want to say that I'm not a scholar on trust, so I will not be providing some kind of comprehensive insight into this type of issues, but I have been doing some work on social change, and recently I developed this interest in intuitions, and I hope that this small presentation will present more some kind of dilemmas and, you know, like problems for debate than, you know, provide some kind of, you know, conventional lecture. So let's just simply start. So when you go and try to see in the literature what has been said about trust, especially in regards to sociology, you can see that it's a very voluminous literature, and I'm not going to go into the details regarding the various definitions, but I am going to highlight some of the key aspects of trust that have been pointed out in the sociology of trust. So, first of all, trust pertains to future behavior. So it's a future-oriented phenomenon. We expect that trustworthy individuals, groups, or institutions will behave in a certain manner. Then there is this idea that trust actually reduces the complexity of the social system. It, in other words, enables a seamless reproduction and even slight modification of norms and rules. Although it is worth noting here and having in mind that Luhmann made a really important distinction between trust and confidence. So trust is an interpersonal relationship, according to Luhmann. And when trust is encapsulated within a social system, then you have confidence. So in other words, when we say, for example, colloquially, that in Serbia we have low levels of trust, that would be wrong according to Luhmann, because actually we have small confidence in these institutions. So trust deals with contingency and is directed towards interpersonal relationships, while confidence, system confidence, is also deals with risks, but in a much more calculable manner. So this is an important distinction, and we will return to it throughout the presentation. Also, some authors stress the fact that trust, interpersonal trust, is an embedded phenomena, as well as that once trust is earned, it has some sort of inertia. So trust has this quality of being self-enforced, because the reason why this happens is that social relations generated through trust have intrinsic value, even if there is, in some sense, a breach of trustworthiness among the actors. So contrary to Proverbs, trustworthiness is not as easily lost, cannot be as easily lost as someone might think. For example, Barbara, who is a scholar on these issues, speaks of Chinese notion of guanxi, in which trust is functionally absent, even though it's widely assumed to be central. So in China, you have this kind of formalized networks of interpersonal relationships between business actors, for example, in which you suppose that there is trust. So you make a business decision and make it so that your friend benefits from it, but you are also competitors. So there is like some sort of like as it says, it is assumed that there is trust, but it is virtually absent in the when you come to the concrete interaction. Of course, it is really important here to also notice the fact that trust is a complex phenomenon. It includes both cognition and emotion. But as we will see, this is sometimes some aspects of this complexity are often overlooked. And most importantly, perhaps, trust entails vulnerability. As one of the authors points out, when I trust, I increase my vulnerability to another agent through an action of my own. And that action is precisely what trust is. If I have not acted, I would not be vulnerable, or at least not as vulnerable to the other agent. So here it is also important to see that trust, according at least to some authors, is not just something which depends upon introspection or is some kind of just simply a relation which is purely psychological, let's say. So it's an action. So it's not something which is deeply moving, much more than we might initially think. Okay. So how is then trust generated? Or rather, how do we gain trustworthiness? Okay, so here we can just, try to unpack some of the key features. So trust usually entails continuously observing a behavioral pattern which justifies that an actor X has earned trust. It's a simple, it's not a definition, but it's a simple feature of trust. So when you look at this, you can see that trust is actually an iterative process. We adjust level of trustworthiness of any given actor depending on the social context, on the interaction, etc. And when you look at all this stuff, so when you look at the fact that it's an iterative process, that it's future-oriented process, it sort of falls close to game theory. And there is this famous work done by Robert Axelrod called Evolutionary Approach to Norms, in which he examined conditions that positively influence the development of norms, which was based on a computer simulation in which individuals play the evolutionary premised norm game. And that game entailed that if a strategy to defect from a given norm, which was in Axelrod's construction of the game, that provided the biggest payoff to the individual. So if this strategy was effective, the actor was more likely to use it again. And this paper brought a revolution in game theory and in studying social norms. And soon enough, actually, this was applied also to trust. Cristina Bicchieri, who is a really important scholar on social norms, actually adopted this whole approach to trustworthiness, and she tried to see how trust emerges among strangers through this game theoretical model. So now the problem here is that when you look at the literature in the field, at least to a large part of the literature on trust, social trust, sociological trust, you will find this overemphasis on cognition. Everybody says that you have the emotional component and then just fails to address the fact. So there is overemphasis on cognition and even in some cases on rationality. So especially in this kind of evolutionary game theoretical approach. So, and I'm not saying that this is inherently wrong. I mean, this is all great scholarship. Bicchieri wrote really important works on norm nudging and stuff like that. Also, her work on trust is, a great read. But there are some problems when you try to study trust in this way through evolutionary game theory. So this overly cognitive approach, as I provisionally call it, has some problems. So evolution implies, first of all, continuity and commensurability of interpretive schemes. However, as Luhmann also pointed out, trust is very important precisely in those situations where risk is high, where justification of current norms are endangered, or again, to use Luhmann terms, where system-wide confidence is shattered. So evolutionary approach is not as useful in these cases. Also, famously, evolution takes time. And again, and this is something which is implied in the first objection, trust is important in those situations of high urgency when there is no time for the evolution of trustworthiness. We all live, this example right now. So you have a huge contingency like pandemic, and you don't have the time. You feel the need to gain trust instantly. So not like to observe patterns, to have a considerable amount of information. We feel it, when you turn out the news, you can see this. So it's not. So you can see the effect of overly cognitive approach quite easily right now, unfortunately. And now, when you have this insistence on cognitive feedback and perpetuating trust, this means that you cannot explain radical change as at all, actually, which is also an implication of the fact that you have evolution as a primary type of a primary tool of explaining social trust. You cannot explain why do I trust new institutional arrangements or radical modification of current ones. So these are all really important issues which we cannot resolve, I feel, if we just tackle the issue of trust from the cognitive approach, from the game theoretical approach, which has some kind of dominance in sociology and especially in political science. Okay, so now I will try to see the affective or the emotional aspect of trust, but not the whole aspect in some sense. I will just focus on one specific, which is intuition. So what is intuition? Intuition is a mode of unconscious knowledge. We know something, but we do not know how we know. And in the literature, you can find that it is defined in various ways, but one nice illustration is this, that it's a process of reaching a conclusion on the basis of little information, which is normally reached on the basis of significantly more information. Now, it is really important here to stress the fact that unconsciousness does not imply that intuition is ingrained or immalleable. In that regard, it falls much closer to habit, and it depends upon experience, which is at least partly changeable through reflection. So when we intuitively see something, it's not some kind of innate, like capability, Cartesian capability. So it's important to see that it is something that we learn, that something that we develop through experience. It is, in some sense, interconnected with our social and natural environment. And it is changeable. So the next aspect of intuition is, when is intuition important? Precisely as trust, it is important in problematic situations. Something unexpected happens and you don't have enough information, then you simply fall back to your intuitions. So there is urgency and there is scarcity of information as aspects of intuitions, important aspects of intuitions. And here we can make a distinction between two aspects of intuition, which are common in social psychology. So first one is so-called inferential intuition. And inferential intuition pertains to rapid and automatic comparison of problematic situations with similar experiences. So it can be defined also as a heuristic that represents a logical inferential process in which several intermediary steps have been omitted or obscured. So this is, let's say, a more like rational-like type of knowledge. So a doctor in the ER, not UR. This is mine. Okay, so I'm also sorry if I'm dyslexic. So if there are like some omissions on my part on spelling, I can read it. You cannot. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. So a doctor in the ER who is forced to make an educated guess about a severely injured patient because there is no time for proper diagnosis, or a stockbroker who also relies on this kind of input when he is formulating his buying or selling strategies. In all of this, there is this kind of like rapid comparison. And, oh, I know this is similar to this, and I can apply it even though I don't have the evidence that this approach should be used. So it mimics a logical process, conventionally rational process, but it is not. And as some authors have noted, this type of intuition produces incrementally new knowledge. So incremental intuiting seems to connect information in a new but predictable manner that builds on the existing domain knowledge, which opens the possibility that it could be mediated by the deliberative system. It is amenable to experts relying on effective schemas, so this is not important. But the big takeaway here is that this is something, this inferential intuition is something that we use in our everyday life to patch small contingency that occur in various aspects of social practice. And it is also something that experts use. This is what makes actually an expert. When you think about it, the expert is the guy, when you go to the ER and when you have a good doctor, that's the doctor that has actually good inferential intuition. You want to go to that doctor. You don't want to go to a doctor who is like, who is devoid of this kind of emotional, like reaction. Okay. And now the second aspect of intuition is so-called holistic intuition. Now it's much more interesting, at least to me, because here we have something which produces completely new modes of knowledge. So first of all, holistic intuition integrates various and relatively distant elements of experience which pertain to the said problematic situation. It intertwines previously incoherent or incongruent elements of our experience and environment. So it's a cognitive process that somehow produces an answer, a solution, or idea without the use of conscious, logically defensible step-by-step process. Now, scientific discoveries have seemed to involve this kind of intuitions. You know, when you have an eureka moment, you have this totally new, previously unimagined, intertwining of various elements of our experience. And Charles Sanders Peirce, a pragmatist, wrote about this aspect of knowledge. So he said that, you know, when there is when we have genuine, paradigm shifting new ideas, new hypotheses, they usually follow through from abductive instincts. So this kind of instinct essentially generates creativity in science, and it also generates paradigm shifting ideas. And he called it a personal light. And a personal light mirrors some aspect of the environment. So Peirce was a realist. So basically, he thought that some aspects of environment shape our intuitions quite literally. And this personal light enables us, to discover this new intertwining of relatively distant aspects of our environment. So I won't read now this rather lengthy quotation from Peirce, but what I ask you to do is to look at the fact that he is connecting this personal light with vital crises. So, and this is also from the really important paper called Philosophy and the Conduct of Life. So, in a good manner of pragmatism, he usually in a couple of steps, you have some kind of scientific problem, and then it is intertwined with the everyday practice. So, in essence, you need this kind of instinctual, almost instinctual and holistic approach to vital problems precisely in those situations in which there is scarcity of information and where a problematic situation, creates this new possibility of generating genuinely new ideas. And now let's see how this relates and how it is connected to trust. So the final move here is to say that inferential intuitions are of key importance in preserving the given social order. For example, inferential intuitions are of key importance if you want to preserve trustworthiness into the stock market, even though inflation might be on the considerable rise. So right now, I suppose that most of the people are actually in the stock markets are obsessed with this fact. So how to produce this kind of inferential intuitions, which will, create, so to say, a Lumanian confidence in the stock market, even though the prices, when you go to the market, at least in Serbia, especially in Serbia, are quite high. So, and of course, I'm not saying that intuitions are always right; they can be quite wrong. So you can have, by the same token, you can say that you can generate inferential intuitions into the credit default swap trading right before the collapse of the global economy. So, and which would be which created all the havoc in the 2008. So we have now the issue of social domination also, which is also not that much developed, or this aspect of interdisciplinary research on trust is usually does not take into account processes of social domination. Now, holistic intuitions, on the other hand, generate those type of trusts which focus on human agency and the vulnerability of trusting a fellow human being. This is so because we are not focused on the similarities of from the environment, but rather on contradiction, incongruencies that might be considered in Persian like vital crises. So, when you have this kind of, as we saw, when you have a holistic approach or holistic intuition, you intertwine something which is contradictory, at least, which is something which is not as commonsensical as one might thought, and then you generate from this a common sense. So holistic intuitions help us interconnect previously disassociated, or in some cases radically rearrange, elements of social and natural experience. So this leads to a new hypothesis about what trustworthiness means. So what it means to trust another person or another institution. And this has the potential, this kind of new hypothesis about what it is to give trust, has this potential of radical social change and radical reorganization of institutional frameworks. And I'm not gonna go much further. I'm just gonna end with a question. So if we are trying to say, and many of my fellows at the Institute have this idea that we actually need some kind of radical democracy or derivative democracy in order to resolve some of the issues that were raised by the late capitalism. But this approach or this idea, although it might be a great idea, has this difficulty that it doesn't scale quite well. And I think that it doesn't scale quite well because we haven't been able to generate these holistic intuitions and justification of new norms of trustworthiness. So we need to have I'm not saying that I have the solution, I'm just pointing toward the problem. If we are trying to provide hope, it seems to me that we cannot provide hope, which is an emotion, only through a deep philosophical, rational debate about it, or logical, type of reasoning and debating, but rather on trying to see how intuitions, how research in intuitions and emotion also plays into this problem, and how can we develop or justify new norms of trustworthiness. Okay, so that's it. Thanks all.
Thank you, Srdjan. And well, I kind of hope that there's going to come the social change part, especially because I announced it. I am sorry for, I just first need to say this, that I'm a little bit sorry for announcing a different paper for Clara. So sorry for my confusion, but here I expected a social change, and if I have time, I will ask a question which will definitely go in the direction of social change. But before me, I would invite you all now to join us in the discussion. Andrea Perunovic raised hand, and Srki, can you please, will you at some point unshare your screen? So Andrea Perunovic is the first, Igor Cvejic after him.
Yes, so hello to everyone. I'm really happy that this conference is happening on this very important subject. So what I want, I have a question for Srdjan. Just define maybe his thesis that is linking intuition and trust, and maybe this question is coming from a different tradition. From a rather continental tradition. So there could be traditionally two objections that could maybe be made to the link that Srdjan posed between intuition and trust. First one could be found in Spinoza, because for him, for Spinoza, the intuition is the highest type of knowledge or type of cognition, which is related to thought, and the lowest ones are related to belief and trust, which are the modes of hearsay, when we hear something and then we repeat it, that is trust, or when we have some kind of vague experiences, like we are trusting that we know what that is, but nobody has any relevant argument to say more about that because he didn't live up to his debt. So that's one question, and then that's one part of my question, and then the other one would be maybe that the intuition also can be linked to Plato's also, the divided line in the sixth book of the Republic, where he is dividing types of sensible, like our sensible world and the intelligible world. So maybe trust is based in pistis, is the second type of the sensible of our approach to the sensible world. So there is, I see that something is happening, so I trust it. Intuition could be still then applied to the intelligible world. So having in mind those two references, how Srdjan would you maybe defend your thesis when linking intuition and trust? Thank you.
Right. Should I answer right now, or shall we collect more?
I suggest maybe we answer immediately after the. Is it okay? immediately after the question, because we have raised hands, so there's...
Okay. Okay, so thanks, Andrea. I'll try to answer. Of course, this is you know, age-old topic, as you already said, and I tackle this issue from the perspective of the pragmatist. So it's actually quite different a take than Spinoza. So according to pragmatists, at least this Peircean, which I indicated only, I didn't have time to go into the details. So as actually. Intuitions fall close to common sense, actually. So you need something as something which is, he calls like everyday doubt. So something which is you need to stop the debate at some point. But he didn't want to do something which was done in Scottish Enlightenment, Thomas Reid and other guys who wanted to see intuitions and common sense as the first principle, of, you know, like something that is innate, something that, you know, which is given to us to provide a foundation for all of knowledge. So it is that, this is why I said that intuitions are malleable. They reflect some kind of aspect of environment. They change, and we react to them. And I do get the fact that. This when you try to interconnect this with trust, there are many issues, as you said. So I'm not saying that you know this you know resolves some major issues with trust that you also raised in your question, but I'm saying that this pragmatic aspect of trusting and relating trust to this kind of intuitions, especially the holistic ones, in which I think that pragmatism has something to say, is important. Is important in a sense that because it provides a way to provide new hypotheses, as I said, without some of the pitfalls of perhaps going into the metaphysics and stuff like that. But I think that we will have, you know, like much more. We will debate much more about this. I do get the fact that this is not, as you said, there are many issues when trying to relate this stuff in a way that I did. So it's far from perfect. I said this is a work in progress. I'm not a scholar on trust, and also my interest in the intuitions was, you know, also rather recently developed. So there is many, you know, things to work out in the time to come. But thank you for your question.
Thank you.
I think now it's Nuria.
Okay, thank you, Adriana. I think it was a wonderful panel. And I would like to share some remarks, really, with both speakers. I begin with Clara. I would like to make you further unfold some of the arguments you presented in the paper. I noted down that you focused on this governance model of ruling as a structure that really avoids the controls usual in nation states patterns, and this governance model, figures, concepts, all the structures related with this ruling model try to convince the public opinion that some groups, some sectors of civil society, they are entitled to become completely free from public accountability. I think at least these ideas were a certain core of the argument of your paper, and so I was quite interested in something you draw as a conclusion from this analysis of governance models and and concepts, insofar as you presented the policy making and the decision making based on this governance model as a distortion of what horizontality and horizontal decision making really means. This governance structure really conceals unequal relations. I think this was also important to build up your argument. How to deal with an alleged horizontal structure of decision making, as at the same time this deliberative alleged horizontal space conceals unequal relations and conceals a completely different scale of preferences, of goals between privileged actors and vulnerable actors. So I just wanted to make you speak a little more about this conclusion, or this consequence of the analysis you made of this spread model of global political rule that we call governance. I would like to also to point out some remarks to Srdjan. Sorry for my terrible pronunciation of your name, Srdjan. Okay. I was very interested in your approach to trust as a social practice. I really agree with the analysis and the remarks you did about this social embedded process that is related with trust. I agree with your suggestion that to reduce trust to a cognitive feedback or a process based on a continuous cognitive feedback is something unilateral, is a quite unilateral approach, and that we have to complement this approach with the help of an understanding, a general understanding of the emotions that drive the trust we assume. But what made me think about this fact, the fact that trust is also in a very in a very hard, in a very deep way, emotion-based, is the fact that what you call intuitions naturally involves something that classical German thinking, but also the works of Scottish Enlightened thinkers. I'm thinking of Kant, but naturally also I'm thinking in Hume, this kind of philosophers. Intuitions relates or hints us to issues or potencies, faculties as wit, at the judgment, but also to what we call in a very general sense of bias. Bias are also intuitions. And in this sense, I would like to bring to the fore the fact that xenophobia, for example, for instance, or the skepticism we talk about in the first minutes of the workshop, the skepticism against vaccination, against the vaccines in the case of COVID. All them are the effect of a holistic intuition, of holistic intuitions in plural. So I am quite concerned about an issue that appeared at the end of your presentation, and I like precisely to ask you what do you think about this hindrances, these obstacles that avert to build up holistic intuitions, not based in fear. In the fear we have each other, in the mistrust we have, the lack of confidence we have in the other, but holistic intuitions more based on vulnerability, interdependence, on the respect of human rights. Why holistic intuitions are the fuel of so many populist movements, and is so weakened in the case of staging a progressive political movement. Why these problems of radical democracy, of progressist politics to engage with holistic structures, intuitions that make us more aware about the things, the issues we have in common. Thank you very much.
Should I begin to answer? Okay. Thank you very much, Nuria, for your question. And I think you understood perfectly what I tried to point out with this notion of governance. Actually, what I wanted to manifest, to point out, is that these new kinds of patterns of rule, which are presented as something so bright, so open to participation, so keen to the democratic participation, are dangerous if we don't have the mechanisms to make accountable the decisions that are being made. Yeah, that's really the problem. One thing that, and actually the problem with the notion of governance, it is that is quite elusive, and that we find many different approaches. Many of the authors that have spoken of governance are actually quite optimistic, and they have a quite different pattern of anthropological pattern. I spoke about the rational choice precisely because some of the authors that speak about governance base their theories on another anthropological pattern, which is quite more optimistic, which is the new institutionalism that has an anthropological pattern that, in contraposition to the rational choice pattern, the Homo economicus, tends to think that humans are capable of bend themselves to certain norms, certain institutions. They are capable of ethical behavior. And of course, I do agree with that. I think the actors are able to behave ethically. The thing is, it is possible to ensure that ethical behavior in the frame of a policy making negotiation or not. We need mechanisms, and that is something that is sometimes lacking, or that could be lacking when we see those general approaches to governance. Actually, if we see what is being made right now in concreto with this notion of governance, we see that it is being used in the European Union in the what is called open method coordination instrument. That is an instrument, this is open method coordination. It is an instrument of the European Union for the policy making in fields such as social policy making, policies against poverty, all those social policies which are not economical policies. And what do we see? What has been made in those concrete governance processes? What do we see? We see that if the nation states don't ensure the mechanisms to guarantee, to ensure that those actors with less power have the means to make their voices heard, they end up being displaced. What I try to manifest with this governance is that we have to be aware when we see this kind of mode of ruling in action, because it is quite highly likely that we don't have those mechanisms to ensure a real horizontality, because these modes of governance are being used not only in the European Union, but in quite numerous multilateral organisms such as the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. And if we don't if we don't demand as citizens, if we don't demand the concrete mechanisms of accountability of those mechanisms of governance, we might end up in a factual, as I said, in a factual use naturalism. The horizontality ends up in the law of the jungle when there is a lack of mechanisms of balance of power, no? And that's the problem, that governance by itself is quite elusive. Yeah, they speak very generally about horizontality. They speak quite generally about negotiation. They speak quite generally about the how the own process of negotiation will end up in the convention of the will of the different negotiator of the different stakeholders at the stake. And I think what I try to point out is that we still lack the mechanisms to ensure that is really democratic, because in its actual form might end up being more a kind of use naturalism, a kind of pre-democratic negotiation. But thank you very much for your presentation, for your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Nuria. This is a really great question, because I was also struggling with the issue of biases, and I could say two things. There's an easy way out for me to answer this question, and a hard one. So the easy answer would be that holistic intuitions should fuel cognitively, emotionally, to put it in a Rortian terms, to change old problems with new problems. So we should develop this kind of new paradigm in which that was my idea. So we should focus on holistic intuitions for exactly this capacity to generate some kind of universally acknowledged, but not metaphysically, founded new paradigms. So that's the easy way out. Just to say, we need new accounts of trustworthiness into new types of institutions. But that doesn't say much, does it? So the difficult issue is, and something that I was trying also to stress, is the fact that first of all, I don't think that that biases are necessarily fueled by holistic intuitions. I think that they are more of an inferential type. So you are focused on some similarities between different aspects of experience, and it is very dubious whether or not these similarities are actually can be justified. But I want to speak, and I love the fact that you mentioned the pandemic. I had this really provocative idea about vaccination and intuitions, and now I'm going to say it. So let's say this: one of the problems here is not how do we combat biases. So biases are usually, combated, as we all know, just provide people with more information, explain them in case of vaccination, little more microbiology, and then magically everybody will go and get vaccinated. And actually with the other, like the people who oppose vaccinations, they are like treated as somebody who are basically devoid of any kind of, insight into the problematic. But when you look this from the intuitively, so if, for example, you say that one of the issues why we have mistrust is the fact that people don't believe big pharma. Let's say that we have one agent who just is skeptical because he doesn't believe big pharmaceutical companies. So is his intuition really that wrong? I mean, you have as we speak about this, we have opioid epidemics in the US, and the accountability of that particular company is not being addressed in a proper manner. So instead of like speaking about, when we speak about biases, instead of speaking about just like information regarding vaccination, we should also address in a serious manner the fact that there is this issue of accountability of big pharmaceutical companies. So that would also that will shatter what I'm trying to say, that if you have this problematic situation, you cannot just, treat it as in a way, you cannot disable the bias without addressing the intuitional aspect of the problematic situation. You should address this also. It is also an issue that I'm, dwelling on for quite some time, because the same problem that you said about intuitions pertains also to common sense. And I made this argument that common sense is not a homogeneous something which is homogeneous, and that you should have internal structure of common sense. So there is common sense. There is also this other aspect which we could call good sense, in which if we wanted to try to see how this could be intertwined, this idea of various intuitions and various aspects of common sense, then I should say that we should generate intuitions that fuel healthy skepticism, everyday skepticism, or good sense, as it's called, within the public sphere. And that is not always limited to just providing information. Sometimes I don't even know what that means, like this colloquial obsession with this, just provide information, do not tackle emotional aspects of it, treat it as something which is redundant or dangerous or populist or whatever, is what partly makes us difficult to tackle problematic situations, but also difficult to resolve it in a manner that I was speaking about, like, to generate generally new type of problems. So I know that I am on a slippery slope here, and I'm quite aware of it. but as I said, this is a work in progress, and it's a good sign that you know that you noticed something that I was also actually like, you know, there was literally a slide about this, you know, yesterday, which I, you know, in the interest of because it's too much a complicated matter, I deleted it. So, but I will continue to think about it. I really thank you on this. This is really, 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 really important for me. So thank you.
Clara, I see you raise hands. Do you want to say something to this, or yeah, please, and then Igor.
I do have a question for Srdjan, but I don't know if I have to, if there are more hands raised or not. So
Igor Zveic is raising his hand from the beginning, so I would like to now maybe change the dynamics of questions and then give floor to Igor, but then immediately after to Clara, and also invite other people if there are those who would like to pose a question, so that we now collect questions, because we have half an hour more. Thank you. Igor, please.
Okay, thank you both for the lectures. I have a question for Srdjan. I very much like the way you try to avoid classical cognition and orient trust over the kind of doing. Of course, I want to be it more emotionally, but so my question that I asked myself, would you think that we should make a difference between reliance or faith and confidence on the one hand and trust on the other hand? So there are some interpretation how we differentiate it. One of them is that in trust we count on other as if this other will have rational motivation to act because he is counted on, which is not the case in reliance. I can rely on my computer. He doesn't have to do anything with it. And probably obsessed with this question, and probably I missed something, but could you just clarify the line between holistic intuitions, intersubjectivity, and trustworthiness? Is this a holistic intuition equal intersubjectivity immediately justifies trustworthiness, or there is something more to it that could explain this line?
Yes, so my question is actually quite connected to what said Igor in the last part of his question, because if I understood well, at the very last part of your presentation, you pointed at the connection between the unbroken connection between institutions and holistic intuitions. And my question is that really the problem, or is it actually more the problem that we, as you said, we have to build trust, taking into account that there is a heterogeneous common sense? Because if holistic intuition is based on the experience, and in the experience, as we will see, the problem today is that the experience is so fragmented and so contingent. It is not more the problem that our experience is so fragmented, so it changes so much that we are unable to build a holistic intuition about that experience, and so to that extent, we are unable as well to build institutions that apply to those holistic intuitions. So yeah, that is my question, but I don't know if I understood well, but you can explain it a little bit further.
As I don't seem to see other hands raised, I would. There's Nuria. I would also like to have two questions. I mean, I have many questions for both of you, but I will try to reduce them to only one. I mean, questions rather. You really make me think about things. But as Srdjan got quite a variety of questions, I mean, I would really like you to maybe say something about social change, because that somehow I read it when I was announcing your presentation. So I would like to see where social change in fact comes in here. And the other thing is a very minor remark, but I would love to hear what you think about that. When at the beginning you were talking about vulnerability and how trust turned to be something where it became clear that my actions, which are directed towards the other, make me also vulnerable, and the trust makes us vulnerable. I would like you to say something about this, I would say, bias or misunderstanding of the fact that this trust is making us invulnerable. So it is how does that work? And also I think that's important in some political sense, because now that's how that's being used. And this is probably also where your and Clara's presentations can be linked, how trust, which wants to be depoliticized, and where we it can be used in today's understanding of politics. And the question for Clara is, in fact, I was listening, and especially when you came to the nod or to the point of governance, and I was kind of consenting to everything you said. It was a very neat and it was a very precise description of what is going on with the world of globalization, so to say. And I was then thinking how in the 90s there was this kind of general trust towards globalization, or at least this kind of alter globalization. I mean, at the end of the 90s, beginning of 2000s, we gave it a name, alter globalism. But before that, there was this kind of general trust that things will be better than they were when we knew who the king was and where the sovereignty lies, to just rephrase the title of your presentation. And then I was thinking, I even wrote a little bit about what you said about governance and this mechanism of governance, and I don't know, hybrid, pluricentral, all of that pluri things, where the process and functions are more important than structures, where you have shifts from parliaments to state agencies, where we have experts who are apolitical politicians. I like that one very much. So and I kind of thought, wow, this really sounds as something, like postmodern theories, where you wanted to have theorists who are not going to talk about grand narratives and all these so apolitical politicians. So I was wondering, how do you see, as you in answering to Nuria, you said that horizontality can end up in the law of jungle. How do you see the present moment? Is there any way, from what you said, for us to retain some trust in globalization, something which would not be a return to sovereignty and the nation state, as we again see that very much around, especially in EU that you were also referring to, where this is one of the ways of reinstalling trust, and in fact completely working against forms of democracies that I think are important for us here. So thank you. I hope I was not too confused. And Nuria, did you also want to ask something?
Yes, I had a very short remark related with this discussing about what holistic structures in intuitions are. I just like to mention that really, at least in my view, holistic intuitions have also a very risky hard side, because they get used with the fact, with the wish, really, that we can grasp our social context from a global point of view. But really, actually, if we cast light over how we gain social knowledge, how we get aware what our social context is, we always function with a very microscopic point of view. In this sense, I would like to mention to you, to highlight the work of a Spanish political epistemologist, Fernando Broncano, who analyzed the value of what he calls blind spots in the making of social structures. What are these blind spots? They are related with the fact that the social agent renounces to completely understand the other he or she is aiming to know. I renounce to this global knowledge, and I assume the incapacity I have to completely cover with my ideas, with my epistemic framework, the identity, the wishes, the epistemic horizons of the others. I don't know if I succeed in communicating this idea. The blind spots, I think, could also work as an alternative to this global aim, this a little bit exaggerated framework of these holistic intuitions. Why to keep this goal to grasp the whole of as a context, a social context, for example? Just this. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll answer first, so you can then ramble on with all the questions we posed to you, Srdjan. About the question you posed, Adriana, thank you very much for it. I have to say that despite difficulties, I'm hopeful about the well. I'm not as pessimistic about the future as it could seem, taking into account what I said in my presentation. I'll say that. I won't say. I was going to say I'm optimistic about the future. I'm not, but I'm not as pessimistic as it would seem. Why? Because I do think how to see about how do I see the future? Of course, it is obvious that if the material conditions of our economies are being more and more internationalized, it is obvious that our politics and our demands as citizens will have to be as internationalized, as global as our economics are. Yes, so I think we are, as citizens, as global citizens, we are more and more aware of what the global problems are. I think the most striking and obvious example of that is, of course, the problem of global warming. We know that's a global problem, and we have to tackle it globally. That, for instance, and also I'm slightly optimistic because we have already some examples that social change and social action of the civil society is possible also at a global scale. And I have two examples of that. One example is the trade agreement, a Latin American trade agreement called ALCA, which was was it was tried to be implemented in the 90s. Actually, it was the civil action of the people of Latin America that made possible to stop the implementation of that trade agreement, which was going to harm the labor rights of the Latin American people. That is one action of success. So I'm quite hopeful in that sense. Also here in Europe, at least in the European Union, we have also another example of success of civil action, which is actually the opposition that was confronted to the trade agreement with the US, the TTIP, the transnational trade agreements. Actually, it was the civil action of the third sector and of the citizens, which made possible that those agreements, which were being negotiated in the global spheres of the European Union, in a quite cryptic manner, and nothing was being exposed to the public opinion. It was actually the action of the public sphere of the citizens that made possible to make a little bit more public those negotiations that were being made, and to make some changes. So I'm not optimistic, because I think we have a lot to face in respect to transnational corporations and transnational organisms, but I'm sure we will find a way to make our voices heard. So yeah, that's it.
Can I interfere just one moment with Marian's question? Marian needed to leave us, but left me a question for both of you, and then I will definitely give floor to you, and we have 12 more minutes, or I don't know, 15 if need be. So the question is this, and then I'm really in the background. So the question is for both. Could we perhaps say, with regard to the pandemic, that we are facing the following problem? The post-Fordist formation is based on a certain fundamental claim to expertise of the mainstream neoclassical economics. This claim involves the naturalization of one particular theory of the human subject, that is Homo economicus, and one particular social theory, that is rational choice theory, which presents itself as science. Since the 2008 financial crash, it seems that people have begun to criticize and resist the strategy of scientization and reduce it to ideology. However, the negative side of this is that they are now also resisting the claim to expertise of medical science with regard to the pandemic. So it seems that the right wing is now using the critical potential, that is distrust, generated by the major crisis of 2008 to defend the status quo in the pandemic. How do we tackle this? Srdjan, do you want to start with the stack of your questions?
Yeah. Thank you all. This is really important. These are really important questions, and thank you, because this insight will certainly be of much help in creating a paper or whatever. So and I don't know that I'm not sure that I will be able to answer all this adequately. But here I can try. So Igor, regarding the reliance and these other terms that you mentioned, yes, it is important to make subtle distinctions here. And as I indicated, Luhmann is a guy who is really, he's been working on trust from the late 60s. And he actually also makes the same kind of point that you do. So he has this distinction between trust, reliance, and familiarity. So familiarity is something which trust, confidence, and familiarity. So and in each term, so to say, and I'm not a Luhmann expert, but as I understood it, it pertains to different levels of contingency. So trust is the most important for him. So he's thinking about system change, and you do this with this leap of faith, which is implied within a trust, and it is precisely because it cannot be encoded into a positive rule. It is something which remains as a residual aspect of the social system, because he wanted to move away from the Pearsonian functionalism, which was overly, focused on let's say, system static rather than systems dynamic. So I think that, if I get your intervention right, this aspect of your intervention, trying to see, it is important to see how perhaps we need much more subtle distinctions, even much more than I provided here, in order to tackle this whole issue adequately. So in that sense, this notion of reliance and what you mentioned is important, and I hope that we could debate it a little bit more. And I'm sorry that I wasn't emotional as you would like. I'm trying. Intuition is the farthest that I have gotten right now. Regarding Clara's and your intervention about intersubjectivity, yes, I do agree with you. There is this problem, and it is also something that what I'm trying is to, basically how to provide a justification for radical social change, which would be inherently intersubjective. So that is what is out for me at stake here. So I have tried to do that with common sense to various degrees. It was unsuccessful or successful, whatever. Now I'm trying to do something with intuitions. But what I think that we are all, forgetting when we ask this question, okay, so the reality is fragmented, and how do we make a coherent, justification of critique or whatever, is that we are actually thinking in cognitive terms. This overly focus on coherence is something when you are trying to provide a justification which plays only into cognitive aspects. What I'm saying is let's reverse our perspective. Let's see what are the intuitions, what are the problems in the public sphere, which kind of problems do they reflect? What are the vital crises here? What are the real vital crises? And then address them, not in a manner where we will provide an argument which Cristina Bicchieri provides. So Cristina Bicchieri is great. I mean, she did wonderful work on norm nudging. So that's basically, trying to see how to provide these incremental changes, and she's really good at that. But that's game theory, and if you want to do that, that's okay. But we have some other ambitions here, as I gather. And then we have to have this Rortian, as I said, Rortian, perspective in which we basically try to formulate new problems for all problems, change new problems for all problems for new problems. So that's what is at stake here. And in that sense, we cannot say that the world won't go to hell tomorrow. We cannot have this kind of, let's say, an argument that will help us to move away from this peril. This is what dealing with contingency is, and this is what providing social hope is. So, in a sense, I do get this is a problem that cannot be actually, I think, resolved. But the very idea that it should be conclusively resolved is part of the problem. So I hope that answers some part of the question. But yeah, thank you. This is really important. And Nuria, first of all, thanks for the reference. I will look it up. I think it's really important. So what I wanted to say first is again the issue of scale here is important. So yes, of course, we are all focused on local context, and trust is usually generated within this narrow confines of social interactions. But if we want to address what I'm trying to say, if we want to make some of the proposals that we usually make, that we need more participation, that we need more radical democracy, if we want to make them really scalable in a sense in which Clara has spoken of global capitalism, we need to provide justification which, as I said earlier, pertains to social hope. Pertaining to social hope, requires, I think, this kind of, a leap which is connected to holistic intuitions. It is not. I do get that it has some inherent dangers in this road, but I think that we are, we need to be really, really cautious. But I cannot, providing social hope without this kind of scalable, let's say, agile notion of intuition we are on the losing path if we go to this like particularistic, confined view of generating trust. Then again, nobody does this better than game theory. We will always lose in the concrete aspects of it, lose. I mean, not lose, but more robust explanations could be found than in game theoretical approaches to this concrete evolutionary aspect of trusting. And this is the main paradigm in social psychology. You cannot find a paper in mainstream, at least, social psychology that doesn't tackle this issue in game theoretical terms to some extent. But thank you. And Adriana, distrust, the issue of distrust and agency. So yeah, this is really, really an interesting take. What I would say here is, at least in part, what you said about how distrust is interconnected with unvulnerability is something which is also important, and which I only mentioned partly, which is the issue of social domination. This issue when it is intertwined with all the other aspects of or problems that I was speaking about. So if you, and this is also plays a little bit into what Nuria asked. If we want to know that we are on a good path, so to say here, is that we always take into account the contingency and the malleable aspects of our, analytical tools. We are not trying to find some kind of Archimedean point in which everything becomes transparent for us. We can do everything with our terms. So we are acknowledging the fact that, everything changes, that as Peirce taught. So, there is this kind of building capacity, but it is not a Cartesian capacity. It is something that changes with the environment. So we are accepting the fact that we are open toward, that we are interacting with each other, that we are vulnerable with it. And this type of vulnerability or openness towards the other is something that gives the greatest strength to this type of argument. On the other hand, forces of social domination might play into some intuition, concrete intuition, whether it be inferential or holistic, but it will always try to, you know, close the debate. So something would be sacred, something would become like, you know, omnipotent in explaining stuff, and you will have the metaphysical. Let's say I'm painting a bad picture of metaphysics, but that's what pragmatists do. But you will always have this kind of invulnerable, historically, you know, unmalleable aspect of the argumentation, which is then, you know, so to say, interconnected or glued to some intuition. So our role as social scientists, as philosophers, is to take into account, knowing that we have these perils, which Nuria said, and knowing that we have these problems of attaining intersubjectivity that Igor and Clara said on the global scale, as Clara said in her paper, but admitting at the same time that it is an unfinishable task, that it is something which cannot be ever, you know, conclusively explained away. So that's the whole idea, and this aspect of tackling this issue is also something in which we combat. Through this, we combat also forces of social domination. So I don't know if this explains anything, but yeah. So and at the end,
let me just jump in and remind you that it's 11:33 and that we should somehow try to stick to, as Nuria is also reminding us here in the chat. So I don't know.
Yeah, I have no more. So that's it. I think that I answered all, and thank you for all the input. I hope that I wasn't too much boring in
No, absolutely not. It was, to my understanding, this was one very good panel, and I'm really grateful to everyone who asked questions, but also to you two who were very imaginative in providing us with answers. So if as I think we should do, if this is the end, if I assume right that we reached the end, let's make a break of 25 minutes and meet again here at noon. Again, thank you so much.